In the centuries known as the Renaissance, roughly spanning the 14th through the 16th centuries in Europe, daily life began to change in steady and thoughtful ways. Towns expanded, trade routes lengthened, and workshops filled with the quiet sounds of tools shaping wood, metal, paper, and stone. It was not an age of sudden transformation, but of gradual curiosity. Artisans, scholars, printers, engineers, and navigators observed the world carefully, seeking practical improvements to familiar tools and long-standing methods. In cities such as Florence, Venice, and Nuremberg, light filtered through tall windows onto workbenches covered with sketches and instruments. Craftsmen measured, adjusted, and refined devices that had existed in simpler forms for generations. Water wheels turned steadily beside rivers. Clocks ticked within stone towers. Printing presses pressed ink into paper with patient rhythm. Each invention was rarely entirely new. More often it was an adaptation, a careful improvement that made daily tasks more efficient or more precise. Renaissance inventions were shaped by observation. Scholars studied ancient manuscripts, rediscovering classical ideas about mathematics, mechanics, and geometry. At the same time, sailors required better navigation tools, merchants needed accurate accounting methods, and architects experimented with improved lifting machines and structural supports. Practical needs guided imagination. The atmosphere of the period was reflective rather than hurried. Ideas moved along trade routes and through handwritten letters. Workshops became quiet centers of experimentation. The boundaries between artist, engineer, and scientist were not rigid. A painter might design stage machinery. A metalworker might refine a surveying instrument. Knowledge was shared through demonstration and repetition. To consider Renaissance inventions is to imagine slow progress shaped by patient hands and attentive minds. Wooden gears turned, ink dried, lenses were polished, and ships were reinforced plank by plank. These innovations did not appear all at once. They unfolded across generations, quietly shaping the modern world while remaining grounded in the textures of stone streets, riverbanks, and softly lit studios. One of the most influential developments of the Renaissance was the refinement of printing with movable type. Before its widespread use, books were copied by hand, a process that required patience, careful penmanship, and many months of labor. Manuscripts were valuable objects, often stored in monasteries or private collections. Their pages were made from parchment or early forms of paper, and each copy carried small variations introduced by the scribe. In the mid-15th century, workshops in the German city of Mainz began experimenting with metal type that could be arranged, inked, and pressed onto paper repeatedly. This system allowed individual letters to be cast in durable metal, arranged into words and lines, then disassembled and reused. The press itself applied even pressure, transferring ink from raised letters onto sheets placed carefully beneath it. The work was methodical. Printers mixed ink to the proper thickness, set type by hand within wooden frames, and operated the press with steady movements. Pages were hung to dry before being folded and bound into volumes. Each stage required attention and care. Over time, the number of available texts increased steadily. Religious works, classical writings, calendars, and practical manuals became more accessible to merchants, scholars, and urban households. The spread of printed material encouraged literacy and the exchange of ideas. Information traveled more reliably from one city to another. Scholars could compare editions, correct errors, and expand upon previous works. While handwriting did not disappear, printed books gradually became a familiar presence in libraries and private studies. The printing press did not create knowledge on its own. Rather, it provided a steady means of sharing it. In quiet workshops filled with the scent of ink and the sound of turning screws, printers contributed to a long process of cultural continuity. Their machines pressed ideas into paper with measured rhythm, allowing learning to circulate gently across Europe. During the Renaissance, advances in timekeeping gradually reshaped the rhythm of daily life. Mechanical clocks had existed in earlier centuries, often installed in church towers or civic buildings, but their design became more refined during this period. Artisans worked to improve accuracy, durability, and consistency, allowing communities to measure hours with greater regularity. Inside clockmakers' workshops, gears were filed carefully by hand. Small metal teeth were shaped to interlock with precision. Weights and counterweights were adjusted so that motion would remain steady rather than uneven. The steady swing of the pendulum would not be introduced until later centuries, but even earlier mechanisms relied on controlled oscillations that marked the passage of time with quiet repetition. Tower clocks became familiar features of urban skylines. Their faces, often decorated with painted numerals or astronomical symbols, overlooked market squares and narrow streets. The sound of bells carried across rooftops, signaling hours for prayer, work, and rest. This shared measurement of time supported trade, civic organization, and coordinated labor. Portable timepieces also began to appear. Early spring-driven clocks and small watches were crafted with delicate internal components housed within metal cases. Though not yet highly precise, they represented a shift toward personal timekeeping. Owners treated them as both instruments and finely made objects, appreciating their craftsmanship as much as their function. The refinement of clocks reflected a broader Renaissance interest in measurement and order. Scholars studied mathematics and geometry, applying these principles to practical devices. The steady ticking of a mechanism symbolized a belief that the world could be understood through careful observation and calculation. Timekeeping devices did not alter life abruptly. Instead, they introduced a gradual regularity. Hours became more evenly divided, appointments more predictable, and routines more synchronized. In workshops filled with the quiet sound of turning gears, artisans contributed to a measured sense of continuity that would continue shaping societies for centuries. Advances in navigation during the Renaissance gradually expanded the known boundaries of the world. Seafarers had long relied on experience, coastal landmarks, and the position of the sun and stars. During this period, however, improvements in instruments and ship design allowed voyages to extend farther from familiar shores with greater confidence. One essential tool was the magnetic compass. Though known in earlier centuries, it became more widely used and carefully constructed in Renaissance Europe. A magnetized needle, balanced on a pivot, aligned itself with Earth's magnetic field, indicating a steady northward direction. Enclosed within protective cases and marked with directional points, the compass provided sailors with a reliable reference even when clouds obscured the sky. The astrolabe and later the crossstaff were also refined. These instruments helped navigators estimate latitude by measuring the angle between the horizon and celestial bodies, such as the sun at midday or particular stars at night. The process required steady hands and clear observation. Calculations were made using tables compiled by scholars who studied astronomy and mathematics. Shipbuilding itself evolved gradually. Caravels and other vessels were designed with stronger hulls and adjustable sails, allowing them to travel efficiently across open waters. These ships did not move quickly by modern standards, but they were capable of sustained journeys supported by careful planning and improved maps. Cartography became more detailed as explorers recorded coastlines and currents. Mapmakers combined reports from travelers with established geographic knowledge, producing charts that were revised and copied in workshops across Europe. These maps reflected accumulated experience rather than sudden discovery. Navigation in the Renaissance was a patient craft. Instruments were handmade, measurements taken cautiously, and routes planned with attention to seasonal winds and tides. Through steady refinement of tools and methods, sailors gradually extended their reach, linking distant ports while relying on devices shaped by careful study and quiet observation. During the Renaissance, improvements in architectural tools and construction techniques gradually reshaped city skylines. Builders and designers drew inspiration from classical Roman structures while also refining practical methods for lifting heavy stone, shaping arches, and reinforcing walls. These developments unfolded steadily within workshops, quarries, and building sites filled with the muted sounds of chisels and pulleys. One important innovation involved the use of more advanced hoisting machines. Large wooden cranes, powered by human or animal strength, were constructed with rotating arms and pulley systems that distributed weight more evenly. Workers inside treadwheels walked in slow circles, causing ropes to wind around drums and lift blocks of stone high above the ground. These devices reduced strain and allowed for the construction of taller domes and more expansive ceilings. Architects also refined their use of perspective drawing and scaled plans. By applying geometry carefully, they could visualize how columns, vaults, and facades would align before materials were assembled. Drafting tables held compasses, rulers, and inked diagrams that translated mathematical proportions into physical form. This careful planning contributed to structural balance and visual harmony. Brunelleschi's dome in Florence is often associated with this period of architectural experimentation, yet similar principles were explored across many regions. Builders experimented with interlocking brick patterns, reinforced supports, and improved scaffolding systems. Each structure rose gradually, layer by layer, guided by measured calculations rather than haste. Materials such as limestone, marble, timber, and iron were selected with attention to durability. Stone surfaces were smoothed patiently, and mortar was mixed to precise consistency. Even decorative elements reflected structural understanding, integrating beauty with stability. These architectural inventions did not transform cities overnight. Instead, they emerged from cumulative adjustments and shared knowledge. In courtyards and workshops, artisans refined machines and methods that allowed buildings to stand taller and endure longer, shaping urban spaces through steady craftsmanship and thoughtful design. During the Renaissance, the study and crafting of lenses led to meaningful refinements in optical instruments. Glassmaking had been practiced for centuries, yet artisans in regions such as Venice gradually improved clarity, uniformity, and curvature. Through careful heating and cooling, molten glass was shaped into smooth discs, then ground and polished with fine abrasives until surfaces became evenly curved and transparent. Spectacles, first developed in the late medieval period, became more widely available during the Renaissance. These early eyeglasses assisted scholars, scribes, and merchants whose eyesight required support for reading or detailed work. Frames were often made of wood, leather, or metal, holding convex lenses before the eyes. Though simple in design, they allowed extended study by candlelight or near tall windows, quietly expanding the practical limits of daily tasks. Lens making also supported advancements in scientific observation. Improved magnifying glasses enabled closer inspection of plants, insects, and mechanical components. While the telescope would be refined at the end of the Renaissance period, its foundations rested in the gradual mastery of shaping glass with consistent curvature. Each lens required patient grinding, with artisans rotating the glass against shaped molds to achieve balanced surfaces. Workshops devoted to optics were calm environments filled with repetitive motion. Fine powders were applied to smooth rough edges. Polishing cloths moved in steady circles. Light entering through high windows was examined as it passed through finished lenses, revealing distortions that required further adjustment. Small imperfections were corrected gradually, reflecting the craftsman's attention to detail. The refinement of lenses did not represent a sudden leap forward. Instead, it emerged through incremental experimentation and shared knowledge among glassmakers and scholars. By improving the ability to see clearly at close range and eventually at great distances, Renaissance optics quietly expanded perception. Through transparent glass shaped by steady hands, the visible world became more detailed, and observation gained new depth within the rhythm of daily study. The Renaissance also brought steady refinement to instruments used for measurement and surveying. As cities expanded and trade routes stretched across land and sea, accurate knowledge of distance, angle, and proportion became increasingly important. Surveyors, architects, and engineers relied on carefully crafted tools to map terrain, design structures, and divide property with clarity. Among these instruments was the quadrant, a simple device shaped as a quarter circle, marked with degrees along its curved edge. By aligning a weighted string with a measured angle, surveyors could estimate heights and slopes. The cross-staff and other sighting tools served similar purposes, allowing observers to measure angles between landmarks or celestial bodies. Though modest in appearance, these instruments represented a careful application of geometry to practical tasks. Workshops that produced measuring devices were organized and quiet. Brass was cast and shaped into smooth arcs. Wooden rulers were cut and marked with precise intervals. Artisans engraved fine lines into metal surfaces, ensuring that measurements could be read accurately. Each mark required patience, as small errors would carry forward into construction or navigation projects. These tools supported the planning of roads, bridges, and canals. Builders relied on measured distances to ensure stability and alignment. Land was divided for cultivation and ownership according to mapped boundaries. In urban centers, planners used surveying instruments to arrange streets and plazas in balanced proportions. The growing attention to measurement reflected a broader Renaissance interest in order and proportion. Mathematics was studied not only as theory but as a practical guide for shaping the environment. Geometry connected the abstract world of numbers with stone, timber, and soil. Surveying instruments did not alter landscapes abruptly. Instead, they introduced greater precision into ongoing practices. Through steady observation and careful calculation, Renaissance artisans translated measured lines into built form. The quiet act of marking angles and distances contributed gradually to more organized spaces and enduring structures. Advances in agricultural tools during the Renaissance unfolded gradually across rural landscapes. While farming methods had long been established, steady refinements in plows, irrigation systems, and crop management improved efficiency over time. These developments were shaped not in royal courts, but in fields and village workshops where practical experience guided adjustment. The heavy-wheeled plow, already known in earlier centuries, was strengthened and adapted for different soil conditions. Iron components were reinforced, and blades were shaped more precisely to turn earth evenly. Farmers observed how soil responded to weight and angle, making small modifications that reduced resistance and allowed animals to pull with greater ease. These refinements did not change the rhythm of farming abruptly, but they eased daily labor. Water management also received attention. In regions dependent on controlled irrigation, simple water lifting devices such as improved scoop wheels and Archimedean screws were used to raise water from rivers into channels. Wooden paddles rotated steadily, powered by human or animal effort, guiding water across fields in measured flows. Stone-lined canals reduced seepage, conserving valuable resources. Crop rotation practices became more organized in certain areas. Farmers observed how alternating grains with legumes restored nutrients to the soil. Though based on long-standing knowledge, these patterns were recorded more carefully, contributing to consistent yields. Agricultural handbooks printed during the period shared such observations beyond local communities. Tools used in planting and harvesting were shaped with attention to durability. Wooden handles were fitted securely into metal heads. Sickles and scythes were balanced to allow smooth cutting motions. Each tool reflected incremental improvement rather than radical redesign. Rural life during the Renaissance remained closely tied to seasonal cycles. Fields were plowed, sown, and harvested in steady succession. Innovation supported continuity rather than disruption. Through careful observation and quiet adjustment, agricultural tools and methods gradually enhanced productivity, sustaining communities with patient refinement grounded in soil, water, and routine labor. During the Renaissance, musical instruments were gradually refined, bringing subtle improvements to sound, design, and usability. Artisans observed how vibration and resonance shaped tone, carefully adjusting materials, string tension, and body construction to create instruments that could fill halls or accompany quiet gatherings. Luthiers in cities such as Venice, Florence, and Nuremberg experimented patiently with the lute, harpsichord, and early forms of string and wind instruments, seeking balance between beauty of tone and practical playability. Wood was selected with attention to density and resonance. Spruce, maple, and other timbers were seasoned slowly to reduce warping, and surfaces were carved, smoothed, and polished to precise dimensions. Strings were adjusted in thickness and length, allowing musicians to produce richer harmonics and more even tuning. Keys and levers were added to some instruments to extend range or simplify operation, reflecting a careful study of both human anatomy and musical possibilities. Wind instruments, such as recorders and early flutes, were gradually shaped to produce clearer tones. Holes were positioned and sized with subtle precision, and reeds were fashioned from specific types of cane to respond reliably under breath. Artisans observed how slight adjustments influenced airflow and pitch, often testing instruments for months before completing a set. The goal was not sudden invention but slow refinement, ensuring each instrument served both musicians and listeners in measured harmony. Workshops were calm spaces where sound filled the air softly, echoing between beams and shelves lined with tools and unfinished pieces. Musicians were invited to test prototypes, offering feedback on tone and comfort. Adjustments were made incrementally, and over time, instruments became more versatile, capable of accompanying ensembles, supporting vocal performance, or providing delicate solo pieces. The careful attention to craft exemplified the Renaissance approach: patient observation, steady improvement, and a gentle merging of art and technology. Musical instruments from this era reflect not only aesthetic refinement but also thoughtful experimentation. In quiet chambers or sunlit studios, craftsmen shaped objects that would resonate for generations, demonstrating how gradual enhancements, repeated with care, could enrich the daily soundscape of Renaissance life. Alongside the refinement of movable type, Renaissance workshops developed careful techniques for illustrating and decorating printed books. Artisans collaborated to add woodcut prints, hand-colored illustrations, and intricate borders, gradually enhancing the visual appeal of texts without altering the printed words themselves. The process was steady, precise, and filled with attention to detail, ensuring that each book became both an informative object and a gentle work of art. Woodblocks were carved slowly, with fine chisels removing excess material while leaving raised designs to transfer ink onto paper. Each line was considered, as small mistakes could affect clarity or symmetry. Once the image was carved, ink was applied evenly, and sheets of paper were pressed carefully against the block. The results were subtle yet clear, soft impressions that complemented the printed text rather than overwhelming it. Color was added with patience. Hand painting was applied to individual pages, often following delicate guidelines or light sketches. Pigments were ground from minerals or plants and mixed with binders to create consistent tones. Artisans worked with steady hands, brushing layers of muted colors over the paper, allowing each layer to dry slowly before the next. The outcome was a calm harmony of text and illustration, each element enhancing the other with understated elegance. In some workshops, copperplate engraving began to appear alongside woodcuts. These techniques required polishing and etching metal plates, then carefully transferring the design to paper under even pressure. Although slower and more demanding, the plates allowed finer detail and subtle shading, expanding the range of visual expression in printed books. Throughout these processes, the atmosphere remained quiet and deliberate. Pages were handled gently, ink was measured precisely, and each stage of production was approached with patience. Printers, illustrators, and colorists coordinated their efforts without hurry, aware that small improvements accumulated over time to produce superior works. Books emerging from these workshops were not only vessels of knowledge but also objects of craftsmanship, designed to be appreciated through both reading and observation. The careful integration of text and illustration reflects the Renaissance mindset: steady improvement, thoughtful collaboration, and attention to detail. In softly lit studios, artists and printers created books that were calm companions for study or reflection, their gentle presence encouraging measured learning and quiet appreciation of both words and images. Metallurgy and metalworking gradually refined the tools and instruments used across many areas of daily life. Blacksmiths, armorers, and metal artisans worked in small workshops where furnaces glowed softly and bellows moved air steadily into the fire. Within these spaces, metals such as iron, steel, copper, and brass were heated, shaped, and cooled through careful, practiced methods. Metalworking itself was not new, but Renaissance craftsmen began to refine the control of temperature and alloy composition. By observing how metals responded to heat and cooling, smiths learned to produce stronger blades, more durable hinges, smoother gears, and finer instrument parts. Small adjustments in the ratio of metals within alloys could improve hardness, flexibility, or resistance to wear. Workshops were organized around rhythm and repetition. Iron bars were placed within charcoal fires until they glowed orange, then lifted to anvils where steady hammer strikes shaped them into useful forms. Assistants turned grinding wheels slowly, smoothing rough edges and sharpening tools. Over time, craftsmen developed improved files, drills, and cutting implements that allowed more precise shaping of metal surfaces. These refinements had quiet but widespread effects. Metal components became essential in clocks, printing presses, navigation instruments, agricultural tools, and architectural machines. Hinges allowed doors and chests to open smoothly. Nails and brackets strengthened wooden structures. Gears transferred motion between rotating mechanisms with greater reliability. Metal artisans often shared knowledge through apprenticeship rather than written instruction. Young apprentices observed techniques closely, learning how to judge heat by color and how to shape metal with balanced force. Through repeated practice, skills passed gradually from one generation to the next. The steady refinement of metalworking during the Renaissance formed a quiet foundation for many other inventions. In the steady glow of workshop fires and the patient rhythm of hammer on anvil, craftsmen produced the durable components that supported tools, machines, and structures across the growing cities and rural landscapes of Europe. Alongside the spread of printing, the Renaissance saw careful improvements in the production of paper and ink. Paper, first introduced to Europe from earlier Asian and Islamic methods, became more widely available as workshops refined its preparation. Artisans selected fibers from linen, cotton, or hemp, soaking and beating them until a fine pulp was formed. This pulp was then pressed into wooden frames with cloth screens, allowing water to drain gradually. The sheets were carefully lifted, dried, and sometimes polished to create a smooth surface suitable for writing or printing. The process of paper making was patient and deliberate. Each stage, from pulping to pressing, required attention to detail to avoid imperfections. Sheets were often hung on lines or stacked to dry evenly, with craftsmen checking thickness and texture. The color of the paper, typically off-white or muted cream, reflected natural fibers rather than artificial bleaching, lending a soft, calm quality to finished volumes. Ink also received careful refinement. Carbon-based inks were mixed with water and binding agents to achieve the proper viscosity. Iron gall inks were prepared by combining oak galls, water, and metal salts, producing dark, lasting marks suitable for manuscripts and printed texts. Artisans stirred mixtures slowly, observing consistency and smoothness, ensuring that the ink would flow evenly from quills or presses without blotting or fading prematurely. Workshops often smelled faintly of pulp, ink, and drying wood. Trays, presses, and small tools were arranged with quiet organization. Apprentices learned through repetition, watching masters pour, press, and smooth the paper, observing the rhythm of ink application and drying. Every sheet and batch reflected careful adjustment, as subtle variations could affect legibility and longevity. The steady improvements in paper and ink contributed directly to the wider circulation of knowledge. Books became more uniform, writing more precise, and communication across cities more reliable. The tactile qualities of paper, its gentle texture under the hand, and the smooth, measured flow of ink enhanced the experience of study, reflection, and recording ideas. In this way, the Renaissance nurtured both practical utility and calm contemplation, turning simple materials into foundations for intellectual continuity and quiet cultural growth. During the Renaissance, a quiet fascination with the heavens inspired careful refinements in scientific instruments for astronomy and measurement. Scholars and artisans collaborated to create devices that could mark positions of stars, observe planetary motion, and measure angles with precision. The development of these instruments was gradual, emerging from careful observation and patient adjustment rather than sudden innovation. One commonly used device was the astrolabe. Crafted from brass or other metals, it consisted of engraved plates and movable pointers, allowing users to chart the altitude of the sun or stars. By aligning the instrument with celestial bodies, observers could estimate time or latitude. The process required steady hands and focused attention, as small misalignments could affect readings. Artisans engraved markings delicately, ensuring clarity and consistency, while astronomers consulted tables to interpret the measurements accurately. Other instruments included armillary spheres, with interlocking rings representing celestial circles, and quadrants, which measured angles of elevation. These devices were often displayed on tables near high windows, where sunlight provided gentle illumination. Scholars would turn rings slowly, rotate pointers, and adjust sights with careful precision, recording observations in notebooks with inked lines and measured notation. The creation and use of these tools reflected a deep patience. Craftsmen balanced metal pieces, polished surfaces, and aligned scales, ensuring instruments remained reliable over years of use. Observers moved deliberately, taking note of subtle changes in the sky, avoiding haste, and repeating measurements to confirm accuracy. The rhythm of this work mirrored the calm movement of the celestial bodies themselves. Through these instruments, Renaissance thinkers could study planetary paths, eclipses, and the rising and setting of stars with increasing certainty. The steady accumulation of knowledge was guided by the marriage of careful craftsmanship and contemplative observation. Each measurement contributed to a broader understanding of the heavens, forming a quiet, unhurried dialogue between humans and the night sky, grounded in methodical practice and enduring attention. Alongside scientific exploration, the Renaissance fostered steady refinement in artistic techniques and workshop practices. Painters, sculptors, and designers experimented patiently with perspective, proportion, and the interplay of light and shadow. These innovations did not emerge suddenly but evolved through careful observation of the natural world, study of classical works, and meticulous practice within calm studio environments. Artists refined methods for mixing pigments and preparing surfaces. Panels of wood and sheets of stretched canvas were coated with gesso, providing smooth, absorbent foundations for color. Pigments, often ground from minerals or plants, were combined with oils or binders in careful proportions. Brushes were selected for stiffness or softness, allowing delicate strokes or broader washes. Every adjustment contributed to subtle control over texture and tone. Perspective became a central concern. Using geometric principles, artists plotted vanishing points and horizon lines, ensuring that architectural elements, figures, and landscapes receded convincingly into space. Workshops were filled with sketches, grids, and small models, allowing painters to test compositions before committing pigment to panel. The rhythm of these exercises was deliberate, each line and mark considered slowly and carefully. Sculptors also applied patient techniques. Marble, clay, and bronze were shaped gradually, using chisels, files, and molds. Even minor modifications were measured and repeated to achieve proportion and balance. Apprentices observed masters at work, learning through imitation and steady repetition, rather than rushing to complete tasks. The quiet studio became a space of methodical practice, where cumulative skill was valued over immediate result. Decorative arts followed similar principles. Metalworkers, engravers, and woodcarvers refined details with gentle care, crafting intricate patterns that enhanced both function and beauty. Each object, whether a cabinet, instrument, or architectural ornament, reflected steady progress and attentive craftsmanship. The workshops of the Renaissance were places of meditative labor. Artists observed the world, tested materials, and refined techniques incrementally. Through patient adjustment and repeated practice, they produced works that harmonized color, light, form, and proportion. In these calm studios, innovation unfolded slowly, guided by observation and steady hands, contributing to the enduring beauty and measured refinement characteristic of Renaissance art. During the Renaissance, gradual improvements in domestic devices quietly shaped everyday life. Artisans and household inventors focused on small machines and practical implements, refining tools that made work around the home more efficient, steady, and reliable. These devices were rarely dramatic. Instead, they emerged through careful observation, repeated adjustment, and patient experimentation, reflecting the measured pace of life in towns and villages. Stoves and hearths, central to cooking and warmth, were adapted for improved efficiency. Metal plates and bricks were arranged to channel heat steadily across surfaces, allowing pots and pans to cook evenly. Chimneys were adjusted to encourage slow, controlled airflow, reducing smoke while conserving warmth. Hearth tools, from pokers to cranes that held kettles, were crafted with balanced proportions, enabling smooth, deliberate movement rather than abrupt exertion. Families could manage meals and fires with greater calm, as each refinement eased the labor of daily routine. Water lifting devices were refined in workshops and villages, providing steady access to wells and streams. Simple pumps, often powered by hand or foot, moved water gently through tubes or pistons, drawing it from underground sources to household containers. Mechanisms were reinforced carefully, with gears and rods polished to reduce friction. Water wheels and scoops, sometimes installed beside rivers or ponds, turned slowly and reliably, transporting liquid for cooking, washing, or irrigation. These modest machines contributed to comfort and hygiene, while their gentle motion mirrored the measured rhythm of rural life. Other household tools, such as spinning wheels, looms, and grain grinders, were gradually perfected. Wooden frames were strengthened, gears and pulleys fitted precisely, and moving parts smoothed to prevent snagging. Each adjustment improved ease of use and longevity, allowing work to proceed at a calm, uninterrupted pace. Everyday chores required less exertion, and the flow of activity within homes became quieter and more predictable. Through these steady improvements, Renaissance domestic life became slightly easier, more orderly, and more comfortable. Attention to design, materials, and motion allowed simple machines to function reliably while conserving energy. The process of adaptation reflected the era's broader ethos: careful observation, incremental refinement, and harmony between human effort and the physical environment. Life in the household moved at a gentle, unhurried pace, supported by devices shaped with patience and steady hands. Reflecting on Renaissance inventions, one is struck by the quiet persistence and careful observation that guided progress. Across workshops, fields, and households, people shaped tools, instruments, and devices with steady hands and patient minds. From printing presses to stoves, from surveying instruments to optical lenses, each invention emerged gradually, refined over years of repetition and attentive experimentation. The rhythm of work was unhurried, allowing knowledge to accumulate gently and methods to stabilize. These inventions did not transform life overnight. Instead, they introduced small, meaningful improvements that eased labor, expanded understanding, and created subtle efficiencies. Artisans observed natural forces, human needs, and material behaviors, then translated these observations into mechanisms that functioned reliably. Their efforts were guided by a calm attention to detail, a willingness to adapt, and an appreciation for the interconnectedness of work, material, and environment. In homes, stoves and simple pumps brought comfort and steadiness to daily routines. In cities, surveying tools and architectural machines quietly supported expanding streets, bridges, and buildings. Scientific observation, from lens crafting to careful record-keeping, deepened perception without haste. Even in rural landscapes, refined plows and irrigation systems shaped the land slowly, conserving energy and harmonizing human activity with seasonal cycles. Each improvement, modest on its own, contributed to a broader pattern of measured progress. The Renaissance teaches a patient approach to innovation. Ideas spread through observation, repetition, and careful instruction rather than abrupt upheaval. Knowledge was shared gently, through workshops, letters, and demonstrations, fostering continuity across generations. Life advanced alongside invention, and human activity was gradually enhanced, without rushing or forcing change. To consider these inventions in quiet reflection is to appreciate the unhurried rhythm of discovery. The world was reshaped not through sudden leaps, but through persistent, thoughtful refinement. Each object, machine, and technique embodies the harmony between human ingenuity and careful observation, forming a foundation for centuries of continued learning. In this meditative perspective, the Renaissance is not a story of dramatic transformation, but of steady, enduring, and quietly sustained progress, a reminder of how gentle persistence can shape the course of human experience.